Hello everyone, and welcome to Wisdom and Wealth. In today's video, we'll be exploring a fascinating topic from the Buddhist tradition, the observer illusion, or who sees the seeing? We'll be diving into how our minds create the sense of a self behind our eyes, and what happens when we begin to question that very notion. This ancient wisdom has some surprising overlaps with modern neuroscience, and offers valuable insights for living a more peaceful and fulfilling life. So, get comfortable, and let's begin this journey together. And before we delve into the intricacies of the subject matter, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel, Buddhist Doctrine, for more content like this. Your support helps us create more videos that explore these profound topics. The question we're asking today is, when seeing simply happens, what occurs? You open your eyes. Before any thought arises, before the mind begins its silent commentary, what has actually transpired? Take a moment, right now, to truly observe this in your own experience. What do you notice in that first, raw moment? We often assume that there's a hidden observer inside, self, behind the eyes that does the seeing, someone that's in control of all of your thoughts. It's almost as if there is a little guy in our head. Someone in complete control of your thoughts, feelings, and emotions. Many of us have been taught and trained our entire lives to think that way, that this little guy exists. But what if that wasn't the case? What if, according to Buddhist teachings, it was not who sees, but what unfolds when seeing arises? In the Sayutta Nikaya, the Buddha offered a foundational view of experience, stating, what is the all? The eye and forms, the ear and sounds, the nose and odors, the tongue and tastes, the body and touches, the mind and ideas. This is called the all. The Buddha wasn't presenting a metaphysical theory about the universe. He was pointing directly to the totality of lived experience. Everything that can be known happens through these 6 sense bases and their corresponding objects. There's nothing outside of this that needs to be added. This is the field of all experience. So, when we look at that, we're saying that everything that you've ever experienced boils down to all of those things. There is nothing else that encompasses what you've experienced. And if you're enjoying this content so far, we would like to invite you to click that like button and subscribe to our channel, Buddhist Doctrine, for more profound insights and discussions on topics like this. We would truly appreciate it. But how does experience arise within this field? In the Majjhima Nikaya, the process is made remarkably clear. Dependent on the eye and forms, eye consciousness arises. The meeting of the three is contact. With contact as condition, there is feeling. This isn't a speculative teaching, a theory about the nature of reality. It's a precise map of what is happening right now. Seeing emerges from conditions, the physical eye, the visible object, and the arising of consciousness. Their meeting gives rise to contact. Contact conditions feeling, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. This is a pure dance of causes and conditions, requiring no inner watcher to perform it. To the wandering ascetic Bhāya, who asked urgently for a path to liberation, the Buddha gave a simple but profound instruction. In the seen, there is only the seen, in the heard, only the heard, in the sensed, only the sensed, in the cognized, only the cognized. When, for you, Bhāya, there will be only the seen in the seen, then, Bhāya, there is no you in connection with that. This is not a theory about truth, it's a training in perception. It calls for staying with the bare experience, as it is, without layering on identity. When seeing occurs, that is all. Seeing. The notion of a self behind the act is an extra thought, an add-on, not part of the seeing itself. That sense of me who sees comes later. It's constructed, not inherent. Now, before we move on, we want to remind you to show your support for Wisdom and Wealth by liking this video and subscribing to our channel, Buddhist Doctrine, for even more content that challenges your way of thinking. Interestingly, this profound insight isn't exclusive to Buddhism. Modern neuroscience, though speaking in a different language, arrives at a parallel understanding. In what is sometimes called the predictive brain model, perception is described as a continual process of guessing and updating. The brain doesn't passively receive information. It generates hypotheses about what's out there and adjusts those predictions based on new sensory input. In this view, perception itself is already shaped by conditions, not directed by a central self. Similarly, philosophical traditions outside of Buddhism have also noted this distinction between immediate experience and mental interpretation. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus remarked, "Men are disturbed not by things, but by the views they take of things." His point is that suffering arises not from events themselves, but from how we interpret them. The Buddha's teaching, however, goes even deeper. He draws attention to the very act of perception, showing that even before interpretation, what we call seeing is already impersonal, already conditioned. So, when you see a simple cup on the table, what is truly happening? The eye meets the form. Consciousness arises. Contact is made. A feeling is born. That is the unfolding. It's a clear process of dependent arising. Nothing more is needed. There is no hidden observer pulling strings behind the scenes. Just this process, moment by moment, clear, empty of self, complete in itself. Now, the mind begins to create the I. A moment after the cup appears, the mind speaks. My cup. I like it. I don't. It happens so quickly, so subtly, that we barely notice it. The bare perception has already been claimed. An owner has appeared. But where did this I come from? Have you ever paused to notice this subtle claiming happening in your own mind? The Buddha addressed this in the Mullapariya Sutta, where he described how the uninstructed mind conceives about, conceives in, conceives from, and conceives that something is the mine. This process is called manana, a habitual pattern of mental proliferation. It doesn't create a permanent self, but it generates the impression of one. Like a shadow following every step, this conceiving adds a layer of identity and ownership to each moment of contact. This formation of self isn't a singular event, but a constant co-arising of processes. In the Mahanidana Sutta, the Buddha vividly illustrated this, showing how consciousness and name and form stand like two sheaves of reeds leaning against each other. One cannot stand without the other. What we take to be an inner observer is not an independent entity, but precisely this mutual interplay between bodily form, mental labels, and awareness. Take away the conditions and the structure collapses. There is no hidden core left behind. In the Sayutta Nikaya, the Buddha offered a simple but profound test. Form is not self. If form were self, it would not lead to affliction, and it would be possible to say of form, "Let my body be thus, let it not be thus." But because it is not self, it leads to affliction, and it cannot be commanded. This same logic applies to feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. None of them truly obey. We cannot force them to stay or leave. They come and go on their own. And what cannot be controlled, what does not follow our will, cannot rightfully be called self. In contrast, some other traditions frame the mystery differently. In Advaita Vedanta, for example, the concept of the esse with Macron K, the eternal witness, is seen as the true self, unchanging and pure. But the Buddha never pointed toward an abiding witness. He always turned attention back to conditions. What arises, stays for a time, and passes away. For him, freedom does not come from identifying with a subtle essence. It comes from recognizing that all experiences, even the sense of witnessing, are dependently arisen. There is no need to cling to what is already flowing. Contemporary science echoes this insight in its own way. Experiments like the rubber hand illusion show how easily the mind assigns ownership where there is none. When a fake hand is stroked in sync with a hidden real hand, people begin to feel that the rubber hand is theirs. The sense of mine can be induced, fabricated. It is not proof of a solid self, but a product of patterns and expectations. Neuroscience, too, finds no single place in the brain where I resides. Awareness arises not from one control center, but from complex interactions across many neural networks. It is distributed, dynamic, and condition-dependent. This view supports the Buddha's ancient insight. The sense of self is not a fixed essence, but an emergent process, impermanent, conditioned, and empty of ownership. So when you catch the mind saying, "My cup," or "I see," pause for a moment. Notice what has quietly occurred. A center has formed, not because it was truly there, but because the mind named it into being. This is not evidence of an inner self. It is the familiar habit of manana, repeating itself again and again, building an I where none needs to be. And one last time, remember to like this video and subscribe to our channel, Buddhist Doctrine, for even more inspiring content. The first moment of seeing is simple. A form appears. Light touches the eye. But almost immediately, the mind gets to work. From a single impression, it begins to build. I like this. I don't like that. This is mine. That belongs to them. And before we realize it, a world has been constructed, with I at the center of it all. Can you recall a recent moment where a simple observation quickly spun into a complex story in your mind? In Sayutta Nikaya, the Buddha spoke to the monk Kakinagata about how most of us view reality. This world, Kakina, for the most part depends upon a duality, upon the notion of existence and the notion of non-existence. But one who sees the arising of the world as it really is does not hold the view of non-existence. One who sees the cessation of the world as it really is does not hold the view of existence. This teaching points to the two extremes, eternalism and nihilism. The mind tends to grasp at one or the other, either believing things exist permanently and independently or that nothing truly exists at all. Both positions are forms of clinging, which in turn give rise to a defender, an observer, someone who takes a side for their fabricated I. The Buddha instead pointed toward Paikasamupta, dependent arising. In this view, things don't exist independently nor do they vanish into nothing. They arise based on conditions and they pass away the same way. No fixed self is needed to explain this unfolding. In Madhyupika Sutta, the Buddha mapped out the next steps in this chain. From contact comes feeling. From feeling comes perception. From perception, thoughts arise. And from thoughts, papanka begins, mental proliferation. The mind starts to multiply its stories. Me versus you, good versus bad, mine versus not mine. Imagine seeing a social media post. Instead of just, information appeared, your mind might immediately spin it into, this is good/bad, this person is right/wrong, how does this affect me? From one neutral moment of contact, an entire conflict is born. The tragedy is not in the contact itself, but in what the mind does with it. This insight finds echoes in other traditions. In chapter 48 of the Tao Te Ching, Laozi observed, in the pursuit of the way, every day something is dropped. Less and less is done until non-doing is achieved. Though his words differ, the direction is similar. Freedom is not found in adding more ideas, but in letting go. In both paths, wisdom lies in subtraction, not in elaborating our thoughts, but in releasing them. However, the Buddha's teaching offers a uniquely sharp clarity. He shows not only that the stories are extra, but that the very observer we believe in, that solid I, is itself part of the story. The sense of a self is not something discovered in the first moment of seeing. It is something built afterward, constructed from views, feelings, comparisons, and narratives. The more the mind proliferates, the more solid the observer feels. But when the stories quiet, the observer fades with them. So the challenge is not in the senses themselves, not in sight, sound, or contact. The challenge lies in the runaway mind. In the way it spins what is simple into something personal. In the way it turns passing events into permanent identity. And yet, once seen clearly, even this habit can be understood. And what is understood can begin to loosen its grip. When observation stands alone, the usual stream of thoughts, naming, judging, grasping, fades into the background. What remains is something simpler. A clear, steady presence. Just seeing, just hearing, without the burden of commentary. Have you ever experienced such a moment, perhaps while deeply absorbed in nature or music? What did that feel like? The Buddha described this capacity of the mind in Anguttara Nikaya. This mind, monks, is luminous. It is defiled by visiting defilements. This luminous mind is not a soul, not a hidden essence. It is the natural clarity of awareness, when the temporary clouds of greed, hatred, and delusion subside. This luminosity is not eternal, but conditional, arising when the mind is not entangled. It shines not because it is separate from the world, but precisely because the conditions for obscuration are absent. You may have touched this directly, perhaps while watching sunlight drift through leaves, or listening to a piece of music so deeply that time disappears. In those moments, there is no need for a narrator. The experience stands fully on its own, without an internal me declaring, "I am aware." Other traditions too have approached this insight in their own ways. The philosopher Jiddu Krishnamurti once observed, "When the mind realizes the observer is the observed, there is observation without division." His words point toward a dissolution of the usual split between subject and object. Similarly, in Western phenomenology, Edmund Husserl spoke of returning to the things themselves, a direct engagement with experience before the mind overlays its concepts. Though their languages differ, both point to a shared truth. Awareness does not require a watcher standing apart. It only needs presence. In simple terms, when attention meets sight or sound without the usual commentary, there is just that, pure contact. The sense of an internal me watching from behind simply doesn't appear. It's not needed. It never was. That sense of ownership, so familiar, is only a habit. When this habit falls quiet, the world opens in a new way. Why does this matter? Because when the gap between self and experience softens, so does the root of suffering. Craving and aversion lose their footing. Decisions become less reactive. Words grow gentler. Actions carry less harm. When we no longer stand apart from what is, we are no longer struggling against it. Awareness itself is enough. We still answer to our names, care for our families, complete our work, make decisions. The Buddha never denied these practical dimensions of living, but he did show how to engage with them without being trapped by the illusion of a fixed inner controller. How do we navigate our everyday lives, our responsibilities, when we start to question the very self that seems to be doing it all? In the Milindapanha, the nun Vajira replied to Mara with a powerful image. Just as when, with an assemblage of parts, the word chariot is used, so, when the aggregates are present, the conventional term being is used. Later, Nagasena offered the same teaching to King Milinda. What we conventionally call a person is like a chariot, a convenient label for parts working together, not an enduring essence. The name, the body, the mind, the personality, none of these alone is a self. Together, they function. But when we mistake this functioning for something fixed, for a solid I or observer, then the label becomes a prison. We get trapped when we forget that it's only a label. This is not just a philosophical insight. It goes to the heart of the Buddha's path. In his first discourse, the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, he declared, "This is the noble truth of suffering. Birth is suffering, aging is suffering, death is suffering, not getting what one wants is suffering. In short, the five aggregates subject to clinging are suffering." He then named the cause, craving, the thirst that clings to pleasant experiences, resists unpleasant ones, and seeks continuity for what is seen as me or mine. And he pointed to the way out, the fading and cessation of that craving. The end of suffering is not found in escaping the world, but in seeing clearly how suffering begins and choosing not to feed it. So why does understanding the observer matter so profoundly? Because the imagined self is precisely the root where craving takes hold. When the mind believes in a solid I, then every feeling becomes intensely personal. My joy, my fear, my loss. Craving grows to defend or maintain that self. But when we clearly see that the observer is simply a mental construction, that link starts to loosen. The feeling may still arise, but it no longer grips so tightly. This insight breaks the chain of suffering. This shift isn't abstract. It changes how we live day by day. Without the constant need to defend an idea of self, our speech becomes gentler. We argue less, listen more. Anger may still come, but we meet it as a passing condition, not a personal threat to me. Joy can still arise, but we enjoy it without clinging. Sorrow can pass through without becoming who we are. To live without clinging to a fixed observer is not to deny our responsibilities. It is to hold them lightly, to see names, roles, and identities as useful, conventional tools, but not ultimate truths. When we do that, life becomes more spacious. We respond with more clarity. We relate with more kindness. And gradually, suffering begins to soften at its root. The Buddha never promised this path would be easy. But he did promise it was possible. Through careful attention, steady practice, and deep inquiry, it becomes a path not just of insight, but of genuine release. And that brings us to the end of today's video. We hope you found this exploration of the observer illusion insightful and thought-provoking. If you did, please remember to give this video a like and subscribe to our channel, Buddhist Doctrine, for more discussions on Buddhist philosophy and its practical applications to modern life. Thank you for joining us on Wisdom and Wealth.